going to begin by looking with photosynthesis at energy, because photosynthesis ultimately is a way for living things, plants and algae and so on, to be able to make their own food because they need energy. So we're going to take a look at the two different types of living organisms that are on Earth. We have autotrophs, and autotrophs are going to be the living organisms that use light to produce their food. So they can't eat, for instance, a tree. They don't have the capability of eating material, but they can produce their own food. And then there are another group called heterotrophs, and a heterotroph is one that obtains their energy by eating. They can actually consume the food themselves. They do not make it. So for instance, you see our lovely cow here, and they're eating hay to be able to have the energy to do what they do. So a heterotroph is going to feed off of autotrophs. For instance, you and I as heterotrophs feed off of lettuce and carrots and all those wonderful fruits and vegetables, the grains that we get from our breads. So we have a wide variety of things that we eat, but we do get our energy from autotrophs. Now, when we get this food energy, there is a chemical energy that is in this food, and we need to know what this is. This is called ATP, and we'll look at what this stands for. Its full name is adenosine triphosphate. So we get the A, and then T for tri, and P for phosphate. So we abbreviate it to ATP. But triphosphate is the 3 phosphate groups that are attached onto this ribose sugar, 1, 2, and 3. So that's where the triphosphate comes in. This is a chemical compound. It's made up of carbon and hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and so on. And it is a chemical compound that you and I use, plants and all animals use, for us to store our energy, and then ultimately we release that energy when we move our muscles or do activity. So this is definitely test question material right here. This ATP molecule is incredibly important. Now you see in the picture the 3 color-coded sections, so you can get an idea already of what this is made up of. ADE here is an abbreviation for adenine. So we know we've seen adenine before as one of our nitrogen bases that we find in DNA. I just realized that the red on that background might not show up too great. So adenine is one we've seen before. RIB here, this pink section, stands for ribose, and that's a sugar that we've seen before. That's a 5-carbon sugar that we find in our RNA molecules. And then we have the 3 phosphate groups that I mentioned for triphosphate. Now, our energy, depending on how much we have used, we can store in several different forms. So when we store energy, we are going to store energy in one of 3 chemical compounds, and ATP would be the best one, and we'll explain why here in just a moment. But energy is stored in our phosphate groups. So you notice that this is a D for di, like a disaccharide. Notice there's only 2 phosphates, so it's adenosine diphosphate. When it adds a phosphate right here so that it becomes ATP, and we have 3 of them, notice that energy is involved. So energy has to be put into that bond right here that's holding the 2 phosphates together. And when energy is attached with that phosphate, it's held in that phosphate, and later when we break the bond, the energy is released. So energy is stored in the phosphate group. AMP is not even in this picture that you see, but AMP would be monophosphate, so that would just be 1 phosphate, and so it's going to be very low energy. It's almost like a dead battery, so it's not going to be very useful at all. ADP, you can see from the picture, this one right here, if this were to be compared to a battery, we would say it's like half, partially charged. So it's going to give you some energy, but it's going to wear out relatively quickly. And then ATP is going to be by far the best. The triphosphates, that's as high as it goes, so we won't have 4. 3 is as many as we'll have. And that one is full energy, you can see from the picture. It's a full battery, fully charged. This one is going to be able to give you the most energy for the longest period of time. Now, like I mentioned, since energy is stored in the bond, in order for us to release the energy, we have to break the bond, because the bond is in, the energy is in the bond. So a phosphate has to be broken in order for the energy to be released. And you can see, something has happened. This bond is no longer connected. It's broken, and we have energy that we can release, that we can use to make proteins, that we can use for active transport, like the sodium and potassium pumps or endocytosis. Any of those active transport ideas, all that need energy, they're getting their energy from breaking the phosphate groups on an ATP molecule. Now, some other reasons or other types of energy that we might use ATP for, I did mention active transport. Cell movement. If we have a cilia or a flagella and the cell needs to move, that just doesn't happen. That takes energy. So active transport, cell movement, these are all things that need ATP. Making proteins. Making proteins is done by the ribosomes, but we also modify proteins and we package and ship them with the ER and the Golgi apparatus, so all of those require energy. Making nucleic acids, the biggest one being your DNA. So every single time you have a new cell and you need to put DNA in it, and you have to make DNA to put into the cell, it takes ATP energy in order to build that new DNA strand. And then also to respond to chemical signals that we have on our cell membrane. So when the nervous system sends down signals from the brain, the spinal cord, to your legs or your arms to tell them to move or respond to something, it takes energy in order for that response to actually happen. So these are all ways in which we use this ATP energy. We use it on a daily, second by second basis.